Marissa Bell Cabrera, Fred Crother, Angela McKenzie, and myself, Stephen DeVogus. Commissioner Nelson Solar is excused. Also present is our Executive Director, Nell Regan. Ms. Regan will proceed with the agenda.
First, please know that there are Spanish and Hmong translators here. Welcome, and thank you to the Mexican Fiesta for hosting, and to LISC Milwaukee for organizing this town hall so the community members have an opportunity to share their views and get direct responses from the two final candidates. I'm Nell Regan. I'm the Executive Director for the Fire and Police Commission. As you know, the board members of the Commission are tasked with appointing the interim chief for the Milwaukee Police Department upon Chief Flynn's retirement. This will be effective February 16th. As part of the process to appoint new leadership to the Milwaukee Police Department, the Fire and Police Commission is seeking input from the community on both the attributes they envision an effective chief possessing, which was discussed at our town hall meeting on January 31st, and currently tonight as we hear specific responses from the two final candidates themselves. Created in 1885, the Milwaukee's Fire and Police Commission is one of the nation's oldest civilian oversight bodies for law enforcement. The original purpose of the Commission was to insulate the essential services of the fire and police departments from political changes in local government. The intention was, and still is, that a diverse group of respected community members could be trusted to appoint department members for these essential services based on merit and for the good of the community. So I personally and the board want to thank you all for attending tonight's event and being engaged in our shared civic life for this city that we truly love. If you are unable to speak tonight or don't want to speak tonight, or you know someone that was unable to attend, you can call our office at 414-286-5000. I returned a lot of calls yesterday. Or email at fpc@milwaukee.gov. Thank you, and with that, I will turn it over to the Director of LISC.
The mic check. Okay.
Test. Thank you. LISC is very pleased to be able to serve the role of host tonight. We think it's really important that communities have a chance to express to the government, in particular the Fire and Police Commission, what our interests are in seeing in the next police chief. LISC serves as an intermediary, which means that we sit between community organizations at the grassroots and corporations, government, foundations who serve to provide philanthropic and other support. And we speak on behalf of the community or with the community, and we support them with grants, loans, and other support. We recognize that it is important to be here tonight, and we believe that communities and residents are stronger when they are informed. We're pleased to see so many people in the room that care about the interim police chief selection. With that, I'll turn this over to our LISC board member, Jean Manzanet.
I appreciate that. Hopefully everyone can see the screens, can hear me clearly, and hear my colleague, Danzia Stronghill, as well as our candidates this evening. I have the great privilege of being asked to be here today. I took the opportunity with a great honor and esteem. Based on my work here in Milwaukee, I am a community banker for a local bank. But beyond that, I am a member of several organizations and executive teams that have worked diligently to provide financial economic development throughout the market. I've been in that role for about 20 years. Previously to that, I was born and raised in New York City and raised in an urban setting just like Milwaukee. And after I moved here, I fell in love with this city, and I've been working hard to improve the quality of life in this city. So with that, this opportunity to be here with you today to be a voice and your advocate today in making sure that your questions are answered clearly, concisely by both of our candidates. It's an incredibly important opportunity this evening. So with that, I'm looking forward to kind of beginning the process of addressing some of our concerns and questions and hearing from our candidates this evening. Make sure that if you have not received your earpieces, if you need translation services, to go towards the back, make sure you get that put together. She's raising her hand and waving her hand. If you need translation services and headsets, they're in the back. Also, we're going to have individuals who are going to be working the room collecting cue cards to receive your questions. We may have some of our basic questions, but we are receiving your questions and forwarding them on and asking our candidates to address them within a timely manner, within a 2 to 4 minute time frame. At this point, I think we're ready to go. I believe that with that, did you want to go with the first question, ma'am? Absolutely. Gentlemen, good luck to both of you, and I hope to hear clear and concise messages from both of you. My first question for today, we'll start this evening by saying, hey, I would love to understand the qualities, the experiences that you both bring to this opportunity, if chosen to be the next chief of police of the city of Milwaukee, do you bring that are going to enhance and improve our city's policing in the near future. So I'm going to start with, if I'll go my near right, I'll start with Mr. Morales.
Hello, everyone. I just want to thank, first, before I answer the question, the Fire and Police Commission. I want to thank everyone out here. It's a Thursday night. People are here after work. This is a very and truly humbling experience to be out here and seeing how many people really, truly value this step to selecting the interim chief. The qualities that I have to be the next chief, and I think they're important. I was born and raised here in the city of Milwaukee. I grew up on 33rd and Garfield. I'm a product of Milwaukee Public Schools, but not only myself, but my wife. We had our home built here in the city of Milwaukee on the far northwest side. We also are raising our children here in the city, and I'm committed to the mentors that helped me get here. I'm standing in front of you not believing that I'm actually having the opportunity to become the chief of police for the city of Milwaukee. I'm indebted to them. And what's important about that, aside from my 25 years of service here in the city of Milwaukee and having the opportunity to make it a safer place to live, work, and raise a family, is the fact that when a crime happens here in the city, we cannot view that as a statistic. When I see an individual or a child that gets shot on 16th and North, or I see a woman that gets carjacked on 33rd and Burnham with her child in her hands, I view those crimes as a friend's daughter, my wife, my sister, my mother. I take those crimes to heart. And it's very difficult if you come from outside to be able to feel that. Growing up in these communities have made it personal for me. And I hope that if I get this job as the police chief, that I'm able to bring our police department closer to the community and really bring back public trust.
Thank you. Officer Bronson.
Good evening, everyone. I too am humbled to be here. I didn't grow up in the city. I actually grew up in Florida, but I've been here for 22 years of my life. And I've always had an interest in law enforcement and connecting with the community. Community engagement and involvement, I believe, is the most important factor of policing, because we are part of the community. I've lived here for 22 years. I teach in this community. I attend church in this community. And I too have 2 sons that I've raised in this community. I've been connected to this agency since I started 22 years ago. I've been a captain. Engaging with the community was an important part of what I did when I was a captain there. Now, in my capacity as an inspector, I'm proud to say that the officers work extremely hard. I'm ready to have them connect, to encourage them to engage in community policing at the forefront. That will be the thing that I put the most emphasis on. In addition to having open and honest and transparent conversations with community stakeholders, the media, and anyone who can assist us in creating a safer community in the city of Milwaukee. Thank you.
Officer Brunson, before you take a seat there, let me ask you to please describe an overview of yourself and your career with MPD. So you said you've been here 22 years, 21 years. Did you start with MPD or did you start with another organization?
Yes, I was 22 years old. I went to college in Tallahassee, Florida, Florida A&M. I graduated with a bachelor's in criminal justice, and I came here in December of 1995 and started the police academy. So I've been here for as long as I've been in basically all of my adult life. I've been in Milwaukee and a member of this police agency.
Thank you. Officer Morales, can you tell us about your path through MPD?
Yes, 25 years of law enforcement. Obviously, I grew up here in the city of Milwaukee. I worked in the three pillars of the department: administration, investigations, and patrol. And I've shown the leadership. There's two types of leadership that run through the police department. It's autocratic and democratic, or collaborating. I prefer to use the democratic way as my upbringing, excuse me, with the police department. It doesn't start there. It starts in high school through sports, and in college through sports. You can't succeed if you don't work as a team. And that didn't go from school. It went on to college and in the police department as working as a team to do that. I've shown it with the police department, working the homicide division, leading that division autocratically through times of crisis to a 93% clearance rate. I've also shown it at District 2, where I can work collaboratively with the community. I worked with the community in bringing the relations back at District 2, and in doing so, I brought external citizen complaints down by more than 50%. I really learned by engaging with the community that the police department doesn't always have all the answers, but the public plays a big role in it. And the Southside community really did a good job at schooling me on that.
Well, Donzia, before we begin taking questions from the community at large here, I want to acknowledge a number of individuals who have joined us this evening, and I'm glad to see that they're here, part of the process and listening as well. Please hold your applause until the end. I want to acknowledge the fact that Job Zepnick, State Representative, is here. Please stand. Tim Carpenter, Senator, State Representative, is also here as well. Put your hand up wherever you are. I saw you earlier. He's here somewhere. I also want to acknowledge Alderman Tony Zielinski, Alderman. I saw him floating around as well. Would like to acknowledge Woody Welch, former chairman of the Fire and Police Commission. Woody, there he is. And I would love to say thank you for your presence as well to Ms. Fernandez, the representative of the Consul de Mexico of Milwaukee. Outstanding. So at this point, we're ready to take some questions, Donzia?
Well, we have one more question to ask. Candidates, describe the type of department that you envision under your leadership. Again, keep your comments between 2 to 4 minutes. Officer Morenas?
This is what I envision with our department. First of all, I want to open up lines of communications with not only the Fire and Police Commission and our intergovernmental partners, but more importantly, with the community and the businesses. We have to be better listeners. I also want to engage with community organizers. Some of the community organizers that I want to mention, and not just those, but are organizers like the Office of Violent Prevention, the Office of African American Affairs, Concerned Citizens for Quality Policing, and Southside Organizing Committee, which are some that I've dealt with in the past and want to encourage to work with them to help us regain that public trust. Internally, what I hope to work with in the department as far as a plan, I submitted to the Fire and Police Commission a plan that follows the 21st century policing model. And I will be using our collaborative reform report as a blueprint in this model. I hope to accomplish that. I hope to look at some of the strategies that we're using and how they're working with the community. We have to listen to the community when we do police strategies that are proactive and ensure that we're not affecting them in a negative way and breaking our relationships. Internally, what I hope to accomplish is bring back the morale of the police officers. We do that through inclusion. We include people from the bottom to the top and give them the ability to have say, so when we have our strategies, there's ownership in them. I also want to bring back the leadership and police organization model, but it's going to be emphasized at the executive level and then down. And as far as a crime plan, what I hope to do is really work on the root cause of the problems that are affecting the city of Milwaukee, county of Milwaukee, and state of Wisconsin, and that's the opioid epidemic. I plan on working collaboratively with our system partners. Those system partners are local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies, as well as our Department of Corrections, our District Attorney's Office, and our U.S. Attorney's Office. We need to work collaboratively and come up with a plan together to address that, because from there, that comes your violent crime, your gun violence, your prostitution, your property crimes, and so your mobile drug trafficking. There's a ton of things that are resulting from the opioid addiction. I think anybody in this room can reflect and know that they have a relationship with a family member who has had an opioid problem or an overdose.
Overall, I believe what I bring to the table as a chief is openness, commitment, and as the chief, what I see going forward is a strong collaboration between the department and those community-based organizations that we work with. The Office of Violence Prevention, Safe and Sound, LISC. Those are important agencies that I believe we can create a stronger bond with. We can find out where the gaps are. We can work together so we can accomplish those joint goals more successfully to increase the safety in the community. Also, I would build relationships with public officials, the Fire and Police Commission, open up those lines of communication, build those relationships, and work together so that we can improve this city and make it safer for everyone. Internally, the first thing I would want to do is do a survey of the officers to find out what their thoughts, what their needs are. How can I best assist them in accomplishing the mission of the department? We have a lot of hard-working, dedicated officers on our department that are committed to increasing the safety in our communities, and I think we need to tap into them. In addition, I would open up those lines of communication with those commanders that bring levels of experience, 20 years plus, most of them, to the forefront, so that we can work together collaboratively, utilizing their good ideas to make this department more effective and find ways that we can better collaborate with the community, find ways that we can better collaborate with federal agencies, with other entities in the criminal justice system. We have a lot of talent on our department, and I think that we need to do a better job in tapping that talent and reaching down to increase the safety for all the neighborhoods within our city.
Thank you both, gentlemen. There's a member of our community who would like to ask, what would your plans be to handle the shortage of officers on patrol on the front line and taking on assignments with anticipated retirements already planned and the drop-off of staffing levels to continue to provide safe and improving the quality of life within our communities? I'll start with Captain Bronson this time.
One of the things that I'm currently engaged in as the inspector and deputy commander of the patrol division, a division of over 1,000 personnel that consists of the 7 police districts and the neighborhood task force, is to equalize the vacancies or the shortages. And so what I have to do is take a look at, and we've created formulas that we share the vacancies, is how we effectively manage the personnel. What I would want to do is take an audit of specialty units that exist within the department, have them evaluated as far as their effectiveness, their core mission, the crime rates as far as the clearance rates, and then we can take a look and see how effective each of those specialized units are. And I believe in equalizing the shortages. So if there's a 20% shortage, for example, compared to historic rates, then 20% should be what it should be in the specialized units also. And I think that's the only fair way to do that, because patrol officers being in those neighborhoods, in those public spaces, addressing the concerns of the community is extremely important. However, I do realize that there are situations as far as the opioid crisis and reckless driving that's a huge problem in our city. And so for those specialized issues that do crop up, then I will be willing to go above that 20% vacancy, if that is it, to address those specific problems. And that's what we're doing now with our surge that we're currently engaged in. And I will be committed to dedicating the resources to address the reckless driving problem that affects our city so precipitously right now.
We have to focus on one reality, and that reality is what's one of our core missions in law enforcement, and that's to respond to the call for an emergency. We're lacking support at the patrol districts. They need to be staffed. That's very important, because local police, if you call 911, we're the first one and the only ones that are coming. So if we don't staff our patrol districts, nobody's coming. And we're burning out our districts by keeping skeleton crews to go out and answer call for service, call for service, call for service. And I heard an individual in the meeting last week that say, we got to work on an officer's mental health. Fatigue is part of your mental health, and we need to staff our districts. So first and most importantly, we have to consolidate our resources. We have to move people from non-operational positions to work on one of the core missions of law enforcement, to respond. And it's unacceptable to wait an hour if you've been robbed, especially if you're sitting out in the cold weather like today and it's snowing and your backpack was taken with your cell phone. Where are you going to go? And what are you going to do? And if the police don't respond, you're just going to walk home. And that goes non-reported. We will be, under my command, we will be consolidating our resources, and we will be eliminating certain task forces, if not many of them, to get our officers back out of the district. Also, what I will do is, and I forgot to mention our 911 system. We need to staff our 911 system. If you call the police, 911, someone has to answer the phone. And we have to work on that and not ignore it.
Thank you. Gentlemen, for many reasons, the plea from Milwaukee Police Department for citizens to contact the non-emergency line to report crimes has not been very successful. What are your plans to either change citizens' willingness to make these calls or develop alternative ways to report crimes? Inspector Brunson, do you want to start?
I believe that it's very important that we're responsive to citizens when they call the police. The non-emergency line, I know 933-4444 has had its problems. However, one of the things that we depend on is calls, specifically for nuisance issues. And so one of the first things that I would do is to get together with the leaders in our technical communications division. We will look at ways that we can utilize personnel, specifically possibly limited duty personnel, to address the concerns and to staff those lines so that we can have a better response. Many people's first contact and only contact with law enforcement is through the 911 system and making those phone calls. We lose credibility as an agency when we don't respond when people call the police or respond in a rapid enough manner to address that problem. And that affects legitimacy. And so I will be committed to putting the personnel necessary in our communications division so that we can improve our response time, so we can address those concerns of citizens in the community. Because when you call for an emergency, you want us to show up. Even though there's thousands of calls that we handle each year, it's important to you as a citizen that we address that concern. That is our role and our job as the police agency to handle your emergency as citizens of our city. And we take that very seriously, and that will be a top priority for me as the chief.
So, Inspector Brunson, you speak to the 911 system. I'm talking about the non-emergency system where we want people to provide information about crimes. The crime is not happening right then, so it's not an emergency, but what are we going to do to make sure that we can get our community engaged so that they are more forthcoming to assist you with the information you need?
Now, you're talking about providing information on crimes. You're not talking about a non-emergency call, which is the 93344 system?
Both of those, but not 911. But I understand that you want to add more personnel and you want to beef up the technological piece. But how does that help us encourage the community to come forward to provide information in the non-911 situation?
Okay, I think how we do that is we make those connections day by day. And I think the district commanders play a very important role in encouraging the citizens to come forward with information. I think that those crime and safety meetings, not to mention the CLOs that work at the district, and the officer as they're going from call to call, we have to use those day-to-day connections. We have to use every opportunity that our police personnel come in contact with the public to build up that trust, to explain to them why it's important that they continue to provide as much information as possible to us so we can be effective in doing our job and addressing those nuisance issues or addressing any type of crime that they may have information on so we can solve it and get to the root of that issue.
Well, I talked about the non-emergency number. That's all in the Emergency Operations Center, our Communications Division Center. Here's what's important. You call somebody, you give information, you want a callback. That is important to get a callback. Was my information valid? Oftentimes you call the police and give information and never know what happened to that. I plan on using, and what I like to do is, first of all, we have a differential response unit. And in our differential response unit, that is a part of Communications Division, it's limited duty police officers that cannot work the streets that take on these calls. And it's a group of people that sometimes don't get enough attention or supervision. So they can blow off a call. You call them, hey, you know, there's this drug dealer, plate number 1234, Robert Boy Nora, and they're dealing in this neighborhood, and you hear nothing about it, and that information goes nowhere. We have to connect our communication, our CADs, computer-aided dispatch systems, with our real-time crime center. This is valid information. In my shoe reviews, I hear vehicles that are being called in by citizens for drug dealing on the northwest side of town, the east side, and the south side. This same vehicles all over the city and county, and people are calling about this vehicle, yet that frontline officer is not getting that information, and we are not calling back those people to get further information to address the 10% of the problem in the city. That is important that we use our systems, our data systems, encourage our personnel that are working those, that they're not just a bunch that's ignored. Our differential response unit has gone to the districts, decentralized, been centralized, but at the end of the day, we're not using them properly. And most importantly, the citizen who calls the police, we have to encourage them to call the police, and we're not encouraging them if we don't simply just call them back.
Thank you, gentlemen. And the next question. The next question actually is an extension of that. I hear both of you speaking clearly and articulating your position on communication and increasing in communication. In today's market, in this city, we have challenges with non-speaking, English-speaking members of our community, whether it's Latino community, Hmong community. Well, the question from our constituent is, what ideas do you want to present, if elected, interim chief, to bridge the gap between non-English speaking community members and the police department to ensure that their voices and concerns are being heard? Captain Morales?
If the police is going to be the community, and the community is going to be the police, then the police department has to reflect the community. And that starts with our hiring, and that also shows in our leadership. And that starts for communication. But it's very important to deal with our immigrant communities, because whether it's the Hispanic community or the Hmong community, Arab community, I can tell you, being second-generation Mexican-American, that there are crimes that are underreported amongst those communities. And you lack, I know this isn't the right way to say it, but you lack intelligence. We can't get that intelligence from those communities to do our work if we don't engage and have a relationship with the communities. Our country was built on immigrants. We're going to continue to have immigration in our country. We have to be responsive to the community and find ways to communicate with them, engage with them.
Thank you. Inspector?
Communication is extremely important, obviously, and I believe that recruiting is one of the most important things that we can do to reflect the representative numbers in our community. And I'll say this one thing. One of the things that I did many years ago as a police officer upon being transferred to the south side of Milwaukee is I took it upon myself to learn Spanish so I could better communicate with members of the community. And so I think it's important that we focus on hiring minorities that represent large portions of our community, because communication is key. And we need all races, creeds, colors in order to be an effective agency. I think that the empathy that you get, the responsiveness that you get from the community when they have officers that they can relate to on a cultural basis is extremely important. And so I would make a commitment as the chief to do everything I can to work with the Fire and Police Commission in recruiting to attract those members of those minority groups and immigrant groups that come to this country to make their lives better. Thank you.
Inspector, before you sit down, there was a question here about initiatives that you've been involved in that relate to recruiting of qualified minorities. Can you speak to that since you brought it up, and then Captain Morales, if you could, when you speak, to answer the other question.
One of the things that I've done personally is I'm a teacher, and I've been an instructor now for about 8 years. And I always utilize my classroom to instruct, to guide, and to encourage individuals to come onto the police department. And I'm proud to say that I have been successful. There's not a great number of my students that are law enforcement officers, but there are some. Also, at my church, I frequently do informational sessions at my church, New Testament, in which I talk to individuals from the community, and I encourage them. Sometimes those young men have questions about a career in law enforcement or an interaction that they might have had with a law enforcement officer where they didn't understand exactly what occurred. And so I provide that information to them about why we do certain things, and then I also use that time to recruit and encourage them to join the police department so that they can come on and they can make an impact and make a difference. And then those individuals are some of the best recruiters for our department. And so that is my personal challenge that I make to myself every time I start a new class, is that I'm going to be a cheerleader for the Milwaukee Police Department and for someone to join us and come make our department better.
I think one advantage that we both have, Inspector Brunson and ourselves, is we reflect a community, a growing community here in the city of Milwaukee. And you often hear this, knowledge is power. And oftentimes when you're talking about minorities in a community, they never see themselves. And I'm one of those people who never saw myself as running for police chief. In fact, I went to Milwaukee Tech believing I was going to be an auto mechanic. And there's coaches that are out here right now in the audience that pushed me to go to college and move to a more interesting career. That happens through mentoring, training, and being a part of the community. And it doesn't start nowadays, it doesn't start at high school, it starts in the youth. I participated in coaching youth football, bringing up children the way I was brought up. When you coach sports, it's not just sports, the game that you teach them, it's the game of life, about being a part of something, and also them seeing you. As a child, going through Tech High School, what the coaches often did is bring professionals that graduated from that school back down there to tell you, I was in your shoes, you can do the same. Being that person, that focal person, and publicly hanging out in these communities is a part of recruitment and letting people know that they can be who you are. And that's a good reflection. I think both of us can do this here, Inspector Brunson and myself, but simply being a part of the community does that. And I encourage people. The problems you have is when we wait till after high school, sometimes when it comes to becoming a law enforcement officer, there's things that you were involved in through high school that keep you from becoming a police officer. We have to start at the youth. There is one plan that I like to enact. It's too long to talk about today, but it starts at the junior high level, freshmen in high school, to encourage people to get involved in the law enforcement plan.
Gentlemen, on a national level, we know that we're receiving a lot of pressure on the immigration issues. It's an important piece of policing, and we know this. There are two questions from several members of our community who are interested in hearing your feedback on this. As immigration issues and concerns increase nationally, and the local pressure for local police departments to participate or support activities with ICE locally, what is your stance on the use of Milwaukee Police Department resources and police officers to work with ICE specifically? I'll start with Captain Morales.
I think I explained this earlier, but I'm second generation. Okay? My parents immigrated here in the 50s from Mexico. I come from a family of 10. The direction of the police department right now is siloed from relationships with all the communities in the city of Milwaukee, to include our businesses. There's a number of crimes that go underreported in the immigrant community here in the city of Milwaukee. To engage in that type of activity would be counterproductive. I can't do that. We need to engage and communicate with this community and gain their trust, as there's a lot of information in the immigrant community that we need to obtain to do our job. That's the one and most important thing that we do. Secondly, we have a policy in place. Our oversight, our boss, the chief of Milwaukee Police boss, is sitting over here, the Fire and Police Commission. If I engaged as the chief in activities that were counterproductive, it will be brought to my attention. So there's a number of mitigating factors that will prevent the police department from engaging that activity and separating our trust with the immigrant community.
I'm going to mirror that statement. We want to build trust with the community. The last thing that we want is citizens that are fearful or scared to come to the police for help, to report a crime, to ask for assistance regarding a nuisance property. Those are the things that we depend on to make neighborhoods better. And so it will be extremely counterproductive for us to now be agents or an extension of ICE. That wouldn't make sense to us as a local law enforcement agency. And so it's something that we would absolutely not do.
This question is from a business owner downtown. He writes, or she writes, we have been seeing a dramatic increase in aggressive panhandling. It's affecting our community and workplace. How do you plan on addressing this issue? Inspector Brunson, do you want to go first?
We do happen to have a city ordinance that prohibits aggressive panhandling that is extremely aggressive or egregious in nature. However, many years ago, as far as asking for money, simple panhandling was deemed to be within the Constitution. So that's one of those things in which we would have to work with those store owners, basically by using potential basically restraining orders and things of that nature. So there's other civil measures that we can take in working with those store owners to have those individuals, especially if they're on store property proper, that can address that particular issue. But it is a challenge for us because, as I stated, many years ago we were able to take action on that, but simple panhandling has been deemed something that is within the Constitution. So I think that that's one of those things that the CPU units at the specific districts can collaborate with that store owner and provide alternative measures to take to address that. In addition, we do have homeless outreach team that we utilize in which we try to provide services for the homeless community so we can get them into treatment and see if there's some need beyond just that person asking for change. Because we need to get to the root of the problem. Someone out asking for money that's potentially homeless, there's usually other underlying ancillary issues that they have that we can refer and address and sometimes directly assist them in going to those entities that will help them with their underlying need.
The business is a part of the community. The business improvement districts, the businesses in downtown Milwaukee, the businesses all over the city, whether it's Brown Deer Road or whether it's Mitchell Street Bid, we need to keep our businesses safe. And we need to work with our businesses. If our businesses leave, we lose revenue, we lose visitors that come and partake in our city. We can't have at McDonald's where opioid addicted people are overdosing in the bathrooms on a daily basis. We need to do something about it. Do I have the answer? This is a problem-oriented policing question where it's going to involve the city leadership, our intergovernmental partners, our system partners, and the community to come up with an answer. We have a problem with our homeless. We have our problem with our people that come in from out of town to buy their drugs in the city of Milwaukee and use their drugs and use the businesses in an area where they're going to use their drugs. That is a big problem. We don't want to scare our businesses out of the city. We need them here. And this is an answer, and this is going to be part of our collaborating with the community. Who can come up with the answer? Because that's going to be an important answer for us to do. The downtown Milwaukee area, we have to do something about it, but we have to do it right. The homeless people have rights too. You just can't place them in cuffs and shoo them away, but that business needs to operate as well. So the answer has to come collaboratively, although we have to work with our businesses and not ignore them either. One last thing, part of this holds on the accountability of that district captain. This is within their authority to work on those problems. Although I say as a whole the department, because there's business and districts throughout the city that are struggling with the same problem. The captains at the districts and each location will be held accountable and have to find a way to work this out.
Wait, Captain Morales, is there a community policing unit within every district?
The CPU, it was started and we had it every district. Now we only have it at 2 districts. In my plan, I plan to bring back the community prosecution unit, problem-oriented policing team, but it's going to be institutionalized in every officer out of the academy.
And so will the community policing unit include district attorneys?
District attorneys, city attorneys, yes.
We'll have to follow up about the funding on that.
Yes.
We'll follow up on that. I really like these 3 questions because it really kind of encompasses what I believe is a true spirit of Milwaukee. Gentlemen, you both have demonstrated that you have a lot of years of experience on the force, and you bring a lot of knowledge to the opportunity of becoming the next interim police chief. With so many years of experience, what would you consider the most challenging within what this community member says, within the box of Milwaukee Police Department? What are the biggest challenges that you can undertake and you see fit and that need to be addressed? And at that point, what would you to consider the most challenging outside the box? So within the box of Milwaukee Police Department and outside that box. And the last piece of this question, which I really like, is upon being named, if you're named, what would you do to work together as your co-candidates for the same position to work together to improve the quality of policing inside the box and outside the box with each other? I'll start with Inspector Bronson.
I think one of the biggest challenges right now outside of the box is the perception and legitimacy challenges that we have in some segments of our communities in the city. How would I address that particular issue is that I will make a commitment to those community-based organizations, the communities, make it a point to reach out as often as possible, let them know that we are committed to working with them in every way that we can, and also encourage our district commanders and division commanders to engage with the community at every opportunity. And to every patrol officer, every detective, every member of the department, we would encourage them to make those connections day to day. You know, people talk about the narrative of policing, and everyone sees the YouTube videos that are available. But it's those day-to-day interactions and the respect that is given and received in each of those interactions that is the most important, and that builds that relationship, and it gives the reputation, good or bad, to a police agency. And so I think what we have to do is show empathy. I think we have to show respect to everyone that we deal with, and we have to make that a consistent practice so that the level of legitimacy and trust increases. And so when that happens, then it's a win-win, because crimes can be solved quicker. Problems can be addressed quicker when you build that trust. That is how you have an effective police agency, one that is trusted by the community, one that's believed in by the community, and I think that we can get there. We've done a lot of positive things, but as in any entity and any organization, we can make improvements. And I'm committed to doing that.
So the second part of that question was the interesting piece for me, right? So if you are selected, what would you do to work with your co-candidate here to improve the quality of policing both internally and externally?
I've known Al for a long time, Captain Morales. And, you know, it's funny because when I was learning Spanish, he was the guy that I often practiced with almost 18, 19 years ago. So He actually worked for me at District 3. He was my lieutenant. And so he's as committed as I am to seeing this city improve and to making those improvements. And so I'm committed to working with him for as long as he's on the agency to make this department better.
Thank you, Inspector. Captain Morales.
Excuse me. Some of the challenges we have with the department is our frontline officers. We made them so robotic. A checklist to do this, a checklist to do that, a checklist to do everything. And in reality, they have lost experiences and how to interact with people. I keep saying we have to be better listeners, because one of the major pieces of psychology in talking to people is being able to communicate with them and being able to simply listen. I taught crisis negotiation for about 10 years on this department and throughout the state of Wisconsin. One of the most important things we need to do is be able to communicate. The biggest challenge is hiring officers at a young age. You learn it when you're in your late 40s, leaving the job, or in their 50s. How do you bring that mentality from somebody who has 25 years of experience into our officers that are 21, 22, 23 years old out of the street? That is always going to be the biggest challenge, to teach them how to communicate. You're physical when you're young, and you use your brain and your mouth when you get older. That's what we have to learn to do with our law enforcement officers. We have to teach them that. We have to, when we talk about our specialty units, are taught how to speak or communicate under crisis, how to talk a person off the ledge, how to talk a person from coming out and putting the gun down and walking out of the house. Why can't all our officers have that type of training? That is one of the most important things we need to do, and give those skills to our officers, because I think communication is 80% of the problem. What I hope, and I have nothing but the respect for Inspector Brunson. And for me, I'm a team builder. I'm not the smartest man in the world, in the room, and I never intend to be the smartest person in the room. I know Inspector Brunson is a very smart person, and he told you himself he learned how to speak Spanish on his own. He's a very smart person. For me, you don't put somebody in a closet who's very smart. If I were the chief, Inspector Brunson would be a part of the team. He's got a lot of stuff that he can offer. He spent his whole career, and most of his career, in patrol. And when I'm telling you we're going to throw our resources or move our resources into patrol, he's going to be a big part of that.
Officer Morales, the DOJ report stated that the police department does not reflect the city it serves. What initiatives have you been involved in, and what would you like to see in the department going forward to address this critical issue?
There's a number of things. I plan on using it as the blueprint. I also plan on speaking with the consulting agency, Hillier Hines, in this. There's a number of things in that collaborative form which I believe are true. From the way we promote, from the way we conduct our police strategies. The police traffic enforcement strategies are one of them. If I have your question correctly, you're asking for an initiative that I believe was part of the collaborative reform? Because the one that I want to talk about is traffic stop. What initiatives have you been involved in, and what would you like to see in the department going forward to address the fact that the police department doesn't reflect, I'm assuming it means it doesn't have a lot of minorities, either people of Hispanic heritage or African American heritage or Hmong heritage. What's your plan to do away with that or address that? All right. Our diversity, every chief that comes in, or every agency, or even something that's not law enforcement related, will often look at diversity and bring people up, bring a diverse group of people in the leadership. But here's what I've seen. I believe this is a part of the collaborative reform, is to bring that diverse leadership that has a say in the decision making that occurs in that executive branch. We haven't seen that. We can promote somebody who's a minority, but we're not allowing those minorities to make decisions in the executive branch. If we're going to break those ceilings, we need to allow people in these positions to make those decisions. I plan to bring on leadership. I think the city will be pleasantly surprised when they see some of the leadership that I plan to bring up in the executive branch to play a role in this, and not only play that role, respected individuals in the community, but to be able to make those decisions. So that's one thing that I plan to do.
One of the challenges that I know that we have as an agency is to attract minorities to a career in law enforcement. And one of the things that causes that is what I talked about. And that's the fact that if you look at the national narrative as far as policing is concerned right now in this country, what do you see? You see conflict at times. You see the worst of incidents played on a continuous loop in our country, on YouTube, on various social media platforms. And so that discourages many minorities from wanting to become police officers. And so how do we counter that? I think the best way that we counter that is for officers that are from the communities and the neighborhoods in our city to be champions, to have those groups, the League of Martin, the Latino Peace Officers Association, and other groups to reach out, to recruit, to show their connectedness to the community, and to show that they've been successful in climbing the ranks, in being a successful officer, in making a difference in those communities. And I think people like myself and others who have come from this community, you have them be the champions for law enforcement, and also working with the Fire and Police Commission and other entities that want to assist us in attracting qualified candidates to this profession. And I think it starts very young. I wanted to be a police officer ever since I was about 11 years old. And so I think that we can reach down, even in elementary school, and pique the interest of young men and young women in the schools of a career in law enforcement. Let them know the benefits of it, the difference that they can make. And I think that we can have an impact on increasing the diversity numbers on our department.
That's a great segue to my next question. So I appreciate that. There's a community member that wanted to make sure that we addressed the ACLU has lawsuits against the police department for stop and frisk. How would you engage young, and I would include young Black and Latino men, without violating their civil rights and human rights? What would you be doing in your role to help with that? And are you familiar with a program called LEAD? And describe. I'll start with Captain Morales.
Stop and frisk. I mentioned earlier one of the challenges I see with the police department is the inexperience of our young officers. With that comes legitimate authority. We often perceive we have more authority than we do to conduct certain stops, and that comes with education, and it's a constant. We have training sessions, and our police academy often relies on liability-based. What I mean by liability-based training is after we get sued, then we say we're going to train. And then we train, and we forget about that training, and then 5 years later we get sued for the same thing again, and then we're going to say we're going to train, and then we train and do it all over. It's a cycle. And the reason why that cycle occurs is because we have a large turnover in our police department. That's just how it is. The young officers go to a different shift, they retire, they get promoted, they're no longer in the front line. This is a constant. Our training, our biases, our legitimate authority. When I mean legitimate authority, is simply just that. We do have a policy on citizen contact, but the policy is one thing, it's the practical application is the other. And we have to continue to reinforce that, and that comes through our supervisors. The supervisors, our sergeants, are one of the most important people out there to keep our front line in place, to train and mentor them. Not to be the person that I gotcha, but to be that trainer, that mentor, holding people accountable. But it all falls back to is consistent training. We train on the front end and not wait for the lawsuit to then say we're going back to these items. Thank you.
Inspector?
I know that we have good policies as it relates to field interviews, stops, etc. But one of the things, and Al mentioned this, is that the actual practice in the field. And so how we can enforce this is through training, and also a tool that a report was done on last night that has been very effective on our police agency, and that's body-worn cameras. Body-worn cameras can serve as a review tool to increase and better prepare our officers to understand stops, the appropriateness of it, in addition to in-depth training. And for me, body-worn cameras from my stints at Internal Affairs would have been extremely nice. When I was there, we didn't have them. And so now you can get to the truth of the matter. You can see deficiencies in stops, and you can address and correct them where in the past you couldn't get an idea specifically of how things exactly went down. But with the body-worn cameras, you can actually see that stop. And so we can make those adjustments. And I think roll call. Every officer that goes out on the street attends a 12-minute roll call. That is a very good opportunity because in-service is periodic. And sometimes those skills, if they're not reinforced all the time, it's like anything else. It can potentially get lost or diminished. And so roll call and those sergeants that give roll call is a very important factor in reinforcing the appropriate way to conduct stops so that constitutional policing is the rule of the day.
I'm the daughter of a former Chicago police officer and a former prosecutor myself. And so I'm familiar with the blue code or blue wall of silence. And how big of an issue do you think that is here in Milwaukee? And how do you plan to address it? Inspector Brunson, do you want to go first?
Everyone heard and have heard those terms that she just mentioned. The blue wall of silence, the code of silence, all of those different factors. And does it exist in policing? Yes, it does. It does exist. But I think now with officers, and as time goes on, I think officers are more apt to be less likely to engage in that type of conduct. And I'm encouraged by that because I've been on the job for 22 years, and I will say that peer pressure, especially during that period of time, 22 years ago, was a lot greater, I believe, than it is now. And I think if you look at the trends in policing overall, you'll see that use of force numbers are down, officer-involved shootings are down across the country, because I think that you're getting a new generation. As you get younger officers, more education, all of those things, I think, play an important part as to officers who are extremely honorable and they're willing to do the right thing and to say something when they see something that is not right. When I came on, it took a lot of guts and fortitude and courage to report something that was not right or to speak up when something was not right. But as I stated, we've seen recently where officers are willing to come forward and to do the right thing.
Accountability. What we have to do is include the supervision at the districts and work locations as part of a team and hold them accountable. In our risk management, we have to include the supervision because we have to train our officers. They're the most vulnerable, the most apt to make mistakes because they are responding to to things of crisis. They make a mistake, and when they make a mistake, it grows bigger by not being honest about the mistake we made. I often tell our supervision, and I often tell the managers, whether in the detective bureau or in patrol. Take care of your cops. It's been said generation after generation after generation, but it gets misinterpreted to say cover up. We never want to cover up for the police officer, but you take care of them by not allowing them to make those mistakes that are going to put them in a bigger problem, and more importantly, lie. We're honest. We take ownership. When we make a mistake, we have to be honest about it. I will be the first one, when we make a mistake, to come forward and say we made a mistake and we're working on resolving that problem. But when we hide it, it makes things that much worse. Honesty is one of the most important things when you swear to take this badge. If you get caught lying, you can no longer testify in court. Our integrity is most important. We find people that are dishonest on the job, you are no longer a certified law enforcement officer. That is one of the most important things we have, is our honesty. We have to remain, we have to be honest, take ownership for the mistakes we have, and really instill that in our officers. Front line, most important, in that front line supervision.
You know, and before we move on to the question, I will just to follow up on that, and the questions for both. Throughout your careers, can you attest to a circumstance and experience where you've held that line as a leader in that moment with a fellow officer or fellow officers where you needed to hold that line? Because it seems from both of you, you're making it very clear that's the extreme, that line of honoring the badge, honoring the oath is so important. Have either of you been in that moment where you've needed to showcase that type of leadership within your experiences as officers?
Absolutely. We're human beings. We're human beings, and if you engage in policing, you are constantly responding to crisis incidents. What I mean by that is, we have a bad day at home. What do you think is going to happen when we're out on the street in the public? We're going to have a bad day out in the public. That's why it's important to work as a team and partnership. And when I talk about taking care of one another, there's been those incidents. Okay. I was a police officer in District 2 when my fiance's house was shot into. And she's now my wife for over 20 years, but her house was shot into. And then I conducted a subject stop after that. What do you think was going through my mind? What do you think was going through my heart? How angry do you think I felt? And it took a partner, and this is over 20 years ago, to hold me back and say, I got this one. That's what it means to be a part of a team. That's what it means to take care of each other. He kept me from having any contact because we're human beings. And that's the way we have to push our policing.
Inspector?
When I was a police officer, and more specifically when I was a sergeant at District 7, we dealt with a situation there in which we had individuals who were heavy-handed. They were heavy-handed. And so I held the line as far as not putting up with that type of conduct. In roll calls, I would address the officers, and unfortunately one of those officers ended up getting caught up in a high-profile incident, the Jude incident. And so I was there standing steadfastly to the point where officers would click the radio, and you police officers know what I'm talking about. So I was ostracized as a supervisor because I took a stand, and I said excessive force will not be tolerated as long as I'm working here. I took that stand of honesty and integrity, and my time at Internal Affairs. I was in many situations in which many members of the department were upset about things that occurred. But I had a duty to uphold, and I performed that duty to the best of my ability. And my faith has always guided me on this job. And it allowed me to be upright and not be concerned about what other members of the department were going to say about me because of the stands that I took in those instances. I've always tried to do the right thing throughout my career. The 22 years I've been on, I would speak up when I saw something that was not right. I would correct wrongs if I was able to do that. And that was one of the reasons why I got into supervision in the first place, is because I wanted to make a difference. I wanted to make the appropriate call when the time came to make it. And so I'm committed to doing that and continue to do that as interim chief if I'm so selected.
How do you intend to continue partnership with organizations like the Salvation Army's Chaplaincy program, or expand other partnership opportunities to share the work of community support and development? Captain Morales?
All our organizations that work in the community are important. We need to keep in constant communication. Now, the Salvation Army responds to incidents like a house that's on fire, and we need to displace some of the family members. There's budget cuts. There's often going to be incidents like that where there's budget cuts and you can't, work a certain area, you can't respond to a neighborhood. We have to find ways to do that. We have to find ways to work with the community. There's several community groups that have a hard time finding funding. Milwaukee Police Department has a group that has our OMAP where they research grants. That's an area where we can work with the community, find ways to, if there's a group that we really need, like the Salvation Army, and they're struggling with finances, this is where we can work with them, work together and find ways to help them out with their budgets so that we can have that funding. We just got to sometimes put our heads together and finding those finances where we can get them. But no group that's working, volunteering, and helping out the community should we be turning our backs to. It's that simple. We're in a time when we need public trust. Every organization that works in the community is important.
We currently have faith-based initiatives that we are embarking on right now through our Office of Community Outreach and Education and Captain Banks, Inspector Jackson. Right now, they're working on the Chaplaincy program, the Salvation Army program, and so that's one of the things that I would definitely emphasize. I will put the resources necessary to collaborate, because many churches and many community members want to know, how can they get involved? How can they help? How can they be part of the solution to increasing safety in our city? And so we want to create programs that will get them plugged in where they can be. As far as our chaplaincy program, those individuals respond directly to scenes and try to bring a calming effect and influence to that scene. Well, that may not be for every church group. And so what we want to do is find those particular areas that they're most interested in, that they can make the best contribution and have them plugged in so those contributions can be made on a consistent basis. Because our belief and my belief is that everyone can get involved, everyone has a part to play, and the faith-based groups play a very important role in our community with their influence, with the resources, and with the connections they have to other agencies that provide help to people in need. And so that would be my commitment, to engage and to utilize those programs to serve as many people as possible.
Gentlemen, I'm going back to the integrity and the development of trust with our public. And we've had, unfortunately, some circumstances where public trust has been challenged because of how situations were dealt with. On a leadership role, when dealing with situations where a police shooting of a young African American and young Latino or minority in general in our community, what would your approach be to dealing and communicating with our community throughout the investigation process without, avoiding any issues with the investigation itself, but dealing with the release of body camera videos that can help subside some of the issues and concerns of public trust? how would you address those concerns, especially with the history here in Milwaukee? So I want to turn to Captain Morales.
In some instances, we have shown the video, but we have to do to the family, and this is two things. The family in an officer-involved shooting is first, then the community, and obviously the community will understand that you have to deal with the family first. Showing the video, we have done it on select occasions, but we have to do a better job of that and show the video. Chicago never showed the video, and now they're showing video, they're showing body camera, and they're doing it in a timely manner. We have to research other departments and see how they're doing it, what their policies are, so that we can do the same. But here's what's more important when we talk about video. Why do people want to see the video? Because there's that lack of public trust. And that's more important to me, is to have that public trust. In incidents such as these, we have to bring community leadership. We have to build that foundation with the community, the entire city of Milwaukee, because we don't know where these incidents are going to happen. And we have to have leadership in the community that we can reach out to. Our intergovernmental partners. There's some intergovernmental partners that are very strong in their communities. We can bring people in on the front end, and we can privy them to information that's out there. And the purpose of that is so they can go out to the community and say, the Milwaukee Police Department is doing their job. The outcome will come. We'll understand we're favorable how the outcome's going to come. They're doing their job. We trust them in what they're doing. But you can't do that after the fact if there is no trust. Because when there's blanks to be filled, the perception will fill those blanks. And it will always go against the police department. You start first by building the trust. And at the end of the day, after you're done, the video won't really matter. But I'm for showing the video. Secondly, what we have to do, I'm losing my train of thought here. What we have to do with this in the video is we have to show our officers how to use the video. We train people on how to use their cameras, turn it on, turn it off, and record. But we don't show them how to use the camera where they're narrating the incident to help the public perceive what's going on or understand what's going on through their eyes. And lastly, what I would like to do in a serious officer-involved shooting where death occurs, I would like to have town hall meetings when the investigation is completely over. Oftentimes, the media takes that angle and shows the public blurbs of what happened. We can have a town hall meeting like this and explain how that incident happened step by step and the resolution so that the public can see what we're doing.
I believe that openness and transparency plays its major role when there is an officer-involved shooting. And first of all, I do know that there was a law proposed in Madison that would kind of inform as far as when and if video can be shown in certain situations. Now, I'm not sure exactly where that bill is, but I know it was proposed approximately 2 to 3 months ago. So, depending on what the law is, I would definitely endeavor to be as open and as transparent as possible without negatively impacting the investigation. Officer-involved shootings are some of the worst circumstances that a community can go through. As we know what happened here in our own city and as we saw in other cities around the country. And so what I would want to focus on is that level of legitimacy beforehand to build up that trust with the community so they would know my character and my background. And when I tell them that there's issues and that we're going to address them, that community believes that and not looks at it as if this is another law enforcement leader who's trying to provide some type of alibi or make some type of excuse for what occurred. I believe the best thing that we can do as a police agency is to be open, honest, transparent, and release as much as we can while respecting the integrity of the investigation. And I think that if you have the trust of the community by being a leader of integrity, then they will wait to pass judgment until the time when that investigation is complete. And I plan on being that type of individual if I'm allotted the opportunity to do so, where that trust has been built up and they can take me at my word when I say that there's issues. Be patient. When the investigation is complete, I'll be as open and transparent and show the video, and we can break it down. And also, I would utilize my district captains. That crime and safety meeting is where the district captains touch their community members each month. And so that's an important opportunity too, to discuss what occurred. And I will be quick to say what we're going to do if that shooting was problematic. Or I'll be honest and say this shooting was legitimate. The officer was defending the life of himself or another. So I think as long as we're honest about what occurred, that we do a thorough, open, honest, and transparent investigation, then I think that community trust is maintained, and calm would be the rule of the day.
Danzia, I'm going to do a quick time check. We're about 9 minutes after the hour.
We're going to go to about 7:20.
About 7:20. Okay, just to making sure everyone's on the same page. Candidates, I advise you to try to kind of keep it concise as possible.
So I'm going to ask two questions at the same time, both about policy and how the department will operate. First, do either of you plan on bringing back the vice unit? And what difference will there be in the protocol of how crimes are solved? Two questions, vice unit and protocol of how crimes are solved.
I'll take it. Okay, we just talked about resources going to the district. We have finite number of resources, but one thing we do have to have, and I plan to call it, didn't want to reveal this till later, but you asked it. It's not so much a vice control division as it is a special investigations division. It's going to work with real-time information. It's going to work with through intelligence. We have to be smarter. I'm going to fall back to 2004, where I was a part of establishing an intelligence unit. And what happens when you do these units, you have to be very careful because there's a curve in training. When you have a specialized unit such as that, there's a ton of training that goes into conducting that type of business, so it falls within policy and you're not hurting the community. But we have data systems, we have intelligence. What we lack is the human intelligence part of it. We have to interact with the community. The Special Investigations Division is going to bring back some experts in that field, and we're going to have to work with some of the experts that left this department and are next door with the district attorney's office, so that we make sure we're doing things legal. But I do plan on bringing that unit. It won't be as big because we're hurting for resources. First and most important, it's the districts, and secondly, it's our specialty unit. We're not going to have one. We're going to get rid of all our task forces to have one proactive unit that's going to work in conjunction with our shootings that are going to be our most important part as a reflection of the opioid problem. So we'll conduct it, rather than conducting our CompStat for performance measures, our CompStat will be on our violent crime that's occurring in the city and addressing it holistically through our intergovernmental and our system partners. So that's the first part to your Vice Control Division question. And I missed your second part, ma'am?
Second was changes in protocols of how crimes are solved.
Yes. This is how we're going to be doing it with intelligence. You have your intelligence, and I did answer that through our CompStat process. When you look at crimes, several of our crimes, it's that 10% of the people in 10% of locations that are causing the majority of the problem. We have to come together as a team with our system partners to address those kind of problems. You'd be surprised when you see several shootings that occur within the city within a couple weeks, how they all can be interconnected. That's how we're going to focus on. So focusing our efforts on the problem people and not the community.
One of the first things that I would do is to do an evaluation of all the specialty units that we have on the department, as I stated earlier. As far as bringing back a specific unit, one of the determinations that I would want to make is to look at historical data to see, because I've heard that comment many times about bringing back certain units. And let's be objective about it and look at the facts. Look at some of the crime rates that existed when those units existed on our department. There's sometimes a tendency to romanticize the good old days when things were supposedly so much better. However, when you take a look back at times and you look at the difference in crime rates during those periods of time, then it's kind of eye-opening. And so what I believe is that you should use objective measures to look at the effectiveness of each specialty unit, because patrol is so vitally important to respond to those calls for service, to go to those public spaces where violent incidents are occurring, and to prevent those crimes from occurring in the first place. That is the charge of the patrol division. And so the more specialty units that you have, you're taking away officers from patrol. And so I would have to know that this unit is going to be as effective as having police officers in those open spaces, addressing the concerns of the community, making those contacts one-to-one on a daily basis. And then if it outweighs that, then it would be something I would think about doing, but I would want to use objective measures to see that and not base it on a romanticization of the past.
And so are task force and specialty units the same thing?
Well, we have separate task forces, and then we do have specialty units also that exist within the department. We have fugitive apprehension unit, robbery task force, neighborhood task force, sensitive crimes, narcotics division. So there's a lot of specialty units that do exist within our department. And what I would want to do is evaluate all of them as far as personnel, how many personnel are assigned, how effective are they, what are the clearance rates for some of those specialized units, to see if it outweighs having those officers back at the district.
So, thank you, but indulge me just 1 minute because I'm confused. Are the task forces the same thing as specialty units, or are they different from those?
Task forces can be a part of specialty units.
Got it.
Exactly.
Got it. Okay. So then one other thing, Gene, please indulge me. Mm-hmm. In the past, community groups had access to crime data. We knew where the hotspots were, and we could interact and have the community-based organizations aware, and we'd try to do more work around those. For the last 6 months to a year, we've not had access to that. What's your commitment to providing us access with that again?
I'm committed to being as open, working collaboratively with community-based organizations, and being as cooperative as possible so that we can be more effective in working together. So that is my charge, that is my commitment to doing that, to working collaboratively, to allowing that access. I know when I was a district commander at District 3, I showed those crime maps to citizens that came to my meeting. I believe that being open, transparent, and honest, and letting citizens know what is going on is the most effective way to run a police agency.
Captain Morales, would you, if you are chief, allow the community-based organizations and intermediaries and other groups that are working on crime and safety be allowed access to the data again?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And I say that because I wanted to do that from the front end.
Gene's talking, so I'll keep going. We have had over the... Are you ready, Gene?
Yeah, I'm ready. I apologize. Gentlemen, you talked about a lot of different ways to kind of dealing with crime and crime prevention in our communities. But I'm looking for new initiatives, new strategies. implementation of new ideas. Yes, it's a collaborative between the police department and the community, but I'm looking to address specifics, right? Carjackings, bringing down shootings, non-fatal shootings. I want to look at, the opioid issues that we have on both sides of the highway at this point that are just really plaguing our communities. What are those new strategies that you're thinking of, have studied about, that you will bring to this position and activate if afforded the opportunity to lead the department at this point?
I plan on bringing the shoot review model as a form of accountability, and what that is I went out to Oakland to study how they do shoot reviews. And here's what's pretty neat about this, is they go over their gun violence every week, and they use that as their CompStat. CompStat is a time when the entire department comes together to focus on some of the issues. We focused in the past on our performance measures. I would use our CompStat to focus and bring all the districts to discuss our gun violence. Our gun violence is connected to our drug problem. But when we address our gun violence through our CompStat, we are listening to information that is real time. We're addressing the people that are the problem today, not last week, and are continuing to be the problem tomorrow. We're going to use our system partners. And what that means is, when I continue to say a collaboration amongst our system partners, our CompStat, we're going to be inviting our local law enforcement neighbors, our state law enforcement neighbors, and our federal partners. We're going to include the prosecutors. We're going to include the Department of Corrections. There's a ton of intelligence that comes from several data sources that we are underutilizing. Our Fusion Center has data systems that can provide us and connect the dots through the CADs, which I mentioned earlier. To simply use strategies where you go out and do traffic stops just to stop somebody that you know nothing about to show police presence is not effective. We've been doing that for 10 years, and all we did was separate ourselves from the community. But to engage and get real-time information and go after the problem people holistically, and in doing so, sometimes identify the policies and procedures that we need to correct amongst all of our agencies, and to communicate that and to share information, because that's just one part of it. We're not going to throw everybody in jail. And part of the shoot review model is to work with the community to pass on some of the people that are causing problems, but we simply don't have time to put them in jail. Use the community to go do some outreach, call in on some of these individuals that are causing problems, to try to help them out of that lifestyle that they're in. Which I mentioned some of those groups that we wanted to do. One group that I sat down with was Office of Violence Prevention. They're violence interrupters. They're people that will walk in the neighborhood without police presence to engage with people that they're hearing our problem, or neighborhoods that they hear our problem. We have to network with them, because not always is the police going to be able to solve some of these problems. So that's what I plan on doing by bringing in the shoot review model. And the shoot review discusses it through system partners, but then we have a separate review with our community partners to address the problems. The community needs to know where the data is, where are shootings occurring, who are the gangs that are involved in these shootings, and who can we reach out to? And lastly, most importantly, we can bring a ton of strategies. I've talked to Marty Sumner from High Point, North Carolina, to the Oakland Model. And what I learned that works best is when you work as a team. The police isn't going to solve the problem. The community isn't going to solve the problem. We solve the problem together, and we work on it together. And when you truly are engaged, that ultimately is what works.
One of the things that I think is the most effective, and how agencies have been able to turn the corner, is by increasing the legitimacy that the police have. You increase that collaboration and cooperation, and then you use a diverse array of strategies to address crime. And one of the things that I've found out and studied over the years is that 10% of the offenders are really responsible for a significant amount of crime that occurs. And so one of the things that we have to do as law enforcement, and we're doing it, is become more intelligent and gain more information on those individuals and target those high-value offenders that are causing most of the issues in our neighborhoods. Now you say, how do we do that? Right now we have a robust intelligence fusion center where we share information, we work with federal partners, in addition to the PSP area, the Center Street Corridor. We already have partnerships with the FBI, with the U.S. Marshals, with the DEA, with federal prosecutors, and with local prosecutors. We need to strengthen those bonds, find better ways to work together. There are many different things that we can do, and I have ideas that we can work together more closely in those two specific areas that we identified. Those areas that we identified in the Center Street Corridor and the Capitol East are some of the more violent neighborhoods in our city. And so the idea is to focus on those areas and the violent offenders together jointly to create the impact that's necessary to change communities. And so I'm willing to put forth the personnel that we need to do that. In addition, as Al mentioned, I actually went to Oakland with Al on that trip where we did see, they call it the Oakland Model. And that is a positive model. It gets down to the heart of what's going on in those shootings. It targets specific information, and it involves a collaboration with their version of the Office of Violence Prevention, in which there is a collaborative relationship, and those individuals from the Office of Violence Prevention in Oakland actually provide services, relocation assistance to individuals who are involved in crime. We can't forget the victims in many of these crimes, because the victim one day, in many cases, is sometimes the suspect in other cases, as we see the conflict that occurs between individuals and the back and forth. And so we want to provide those services to interrupt that violence. And so the Office of Violence Prevention, even locally, is moving forward with its blueprint, and there's many facets to that, in addition to a trauma-informed care program that is currently in District 5 and District 7 that will be expanding throughout the rest of the city. Because I believe that if you catch the individual who might be criminal prone young and provide services from the trauma that that individual might have experienced, then we can make a difference long term in this city to change that trauma that he's experienced or she's experienced, so it doesn't turn it or manifest itself into criminogenic behavior later on in life. I think it's been proven that many of the individuals that make up our prisons were exposed to various types of trauma when they were young. And so if we can even start then in being effective, then I think long term this city will be better.
Just a quick follow-up on that, and I appreciate that you've been very candid and very strategic about your responses. But I'll give you a real-life scenario today. Unfortunately, we lost the life of an individual off of Lincoln, 5th and Lincoln recently, to reckless driving. How, in your strategies that you've just brought forth, how would those strategies help resolve and prosecute the individual who was behind the wheel of that vehicle? How does that play out in real life today?
As far as the strategy that I just mentioned?
Yeah, right. The strategy that you implement to capture or apprehend and prosecute the individual behind the driver of that car.
As far as catching an individual who, after a crime is committed, is that what you're asking me?
Correct.
Okay. We depend on the community in cases such as that, where we get surveillance footage. And it goes back to what we've been talking about here ad nauseum. And that is for the community to have the belief and the trust in us so that they will come forward when they see surveillance footage of an individual. to tell us what occurred. And so as far as addressing the reckless driving issue, that is a separate issue that I addressed with the surge. My plan is to continue. Right now, we've embarked on a surge that we've been engaged in for a few months on the department to affect the reckless driving behavior that we've seen in our city. And so my plan calls for creating an actual unit, because right now it's overtime based, where we're using officers from other areas of the city to come together. Well, what I want to do, and I believe that the reckless driving problem is so significant that we need to create a unit to address that. And that is what I'm committed to do, so we can have the long-term effects of a surge on a day-to-day basis without the overtime component that exists right now. And wherever that surge, those surge officers are deployed, they are having an impact based on our preliminary information. And that is something that I'm committed to do, because I believe that traffic safety is just as important as addressing crime. Because you're right, if someone is cut down from a reckless driver, or if it's gun violence, unfortunately, that's a life lost no matter what, that can't be replaced. And so I'm committed to addressing the reckless driver issue and the crime issue.
Captain Morales, how would you address that?
Well, first, it's I hate to take a stance right here that's going to be conflicting, but I said in an interview and I stand by it. The surge is not working. That type of traffic stop, holding the people responsible. And what I mean by that is conducting 21,000 traffic stops, and 60% of the people that stop get a ticket, but we let less than 5% of the people drive away and do a non-pursuit. Those are your reckless drivers, and those are the people we're not holding accountable. We have to hold the people accountable that flee from us. My experience, 25 years on the job, when we chase somebody, it was most often right turn, left, and bail, because they knew they couldn't get away from the police. And I'm not saying the sole thing is to pursue people. We have to find alternative measures, but we created this mess. There's far more reckless driving now than there ever was. We can't stick our heads in the sand and say the prosecutors aren't going to make a difference, the judges aren't going to make a difference, so we're not going to do anything. I've said this over and over and over, that the police are the first and sometimes the last line of defense when we're out there in the community. We don't have an option to ignore crime, and we have to take a stance on it. And we have to hold those people accountable regardless of what happens in the court system. To let people flee and then just write a non-pursuit document that said the guy got away when we didn't even make an effort, for me, that's unacceptable.
Final.
I just want to respond to the whole pursuit issue and non-pursuit issue. I will say this. September of 2017 is when our pursuit policy changed. And now you are able to go after those individuals that are dealing drugs and that are engaged in reckless driving. And so since that time, there was a presentation yesterday in Comstat. Pursuits are up 156% since that change in the pursuit policy. So the fact that people are allowing people to drive away and writing it up is not what's occurring now. Officers are making discretionary decisions to not engage or engage in a pursuit based on what's happening, based on other safety factors, but they're able, and by the statistics that we've seen, are engaging in pursuits of some of those reckless drivers that in the past we weren't able to pursue. I just want to make that clear.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to be winding up now.
That's correct.
We asked, during the last hearing, we were asked a question that I really feel compelled to ask as we wind up. About a year ago, the Supreme Court said that the police department could no longer have a residency requirement that officers had to live here. Both of you spoke to the need to have more diverse people on the force, spoke about the need to interact with communities, spoke about the need for there to be mentors and engagers from the community. Can you give us some type of commitment that while you can't legally force people to live in Milwaukee, that you will encourage your members to remain here and not be an occupying force? Shouldn't take long.
Oh, it shouldn't. You lead by example.
Thank you.
I had my home built in the city of Milwaukee, as I stated earlier. I'm committed to this city, and I'm committed to the crime problems in this city. And one of the things I say, they have a right, any department member has the right to live out of the city, and most often they do it because of their child. They want a better education for their child, or that's what's said, lower taxes, or want to live outside of the city. Well, they have a right to do that. But for me, you can't show commitment, or the way I see it, and this is my opinion, if you're committed to the city, you live here because as I stated in the beginning, when a 12-year-old gets shot on 16th and North, or when a mother gets carjacked in front of her child on another side of town, I look at those people as people from the community that I grew up in. Those are people I went to school with. And when you don't reflect that, then you make statements like, it's just a bad guy shooting a bad guy. Who really cares? I'm just going to do my job. Or prostitution is the oldest profession in the book. But so is homicide. And if you don't care about the work you do, then you're not committed.
Thank you.
I agree, and I would emphasize city residents. I think that when you live in a community, you're more connected to that community. You have friends in that community. Not saying you don't if you move outside the city, but I would definitely be a champion for the city of Milwaukee and all the things that we see that are positive coming over the horizon on this city. I've been here my whole adult life, as far as since I worked on the department. I have a commitment, obviously, to stay here. I believe that having those neighbors that know your name, that live in the city, and having that investment is very important. I'm concerned for the long-time viability of the city. And I've heard those comments at times for individuals who maybe downplay things that are occurring. But I think that if you're here as a law enforcement officer, and you don't have to be, I think that shows some extra commitment, that you're here for the long haul, that you're engaged, that you really care about the long-term benefit of this city. And so I would definitely be a champion for members, and I would encourage members to live in the city. And if possible, you know, if there was some type of incentive that could be offered, I would recommend even that too for those individuals that live in the city.
Thank you. Gene, do you want to wrap up?
I'll wrap up. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here. I think that's the most important thing is to hear from the candidates as they do their closing statements. But before I do that, I want to say thank you to the Police and Fire Commission being in attendance and organizing this event for our community, which is an important opportunity for us to hear from the candidates themselves. So please join me as we say thank you to the Police and Fire Commission. I want to say a special shout out to Clifton Crump, who actually put this together. Clifton, where's your hand? Thank you. And I'm going to ask to be brief, but to give us your final comments.
It's humbling. Thank you very much for coming out here. Fire and Police Commission, thank you very much for giving us this opportunity. Very humbling. And just lastly, I'm the Milwaukee native, committed to a lifetime of public service. And I look forward to working with the community to make this area, this city, a safer place to live, work, and raise a family.
I've been on the department for 22 years of my life. I've made the commitment to stand for justice, integrity, and honor. I've been a supervisor on this job and a leader since the year 2000. And I've always made the commitment to do the right thing, to be open, to be honest, to be transparent, to encourage the personnel that work for me to greater excellence, I'm committed to problem solving. I'm committed to community engagement, accountability, and transparency. And I think that I've shown that throughout my career that I will always put doing the right thing above everything else. I'm committed to this city, and I thank you for the opportunity, Fire and Police Commission. I thank you for spending your Thursday night here. It's very important that citizens be engaged, and I look forward to seeing you all in the future. Thank you for this opportunity, and God bless everyone.
Thank you. So